I loathed the regular gatherings at the county club. It felt like there was always some excuse for a lavish party where a bunch of affluent individuals could indulge in their egos. My wife, Sherry, adored these events and eagerly anticipated them. Unfortunately, over the last year or so, she started drinking excessively, leading to moments where she embarrassed both herself and me. Sherry and I had been married for 24 years and had 3 college-aged children. We met during my MBA, and there was an immediate connection. However, our relationship had cooled down about a decade ago, and I assumed it was a natural progression. I longed for more affection and quality time together, but I didn't want to pressure her. I accepted that the rest of my life would lack romance. I had a great job with a substantial income, which was necessary as putting 3 kids through college was expensive. Despite the financial strain, we were still well off. Sherry didn't work and had no desire to, instead dedicating her time to community work and social engagements. She still maintained her looks remarkably well, thanks in part to frequent trips to the spa and salon. I was pretty average, with a bit of a bulge around the middle and some gray creeping in at the temples. I dressed well, mostly because of my job and my wife's penchant for shopping. While I was competent at my job, I didn't find it fulfilling. I longed for something new, something that would bring me joy without worrying about the paycheck, and I wanted to relocate. Our house was too big for just the 2 of us, and the upkeep was draining. But my wife refused to even entertain these ideas. She was attached to her big house, the country club, and her wealthy friends. At one of these gatherings, I wandered around the club, engaging in small talk about trivial matters. As the night dragged on, I nursed my drink while Sherry seemed to be just getting started. It was clear she had been drinking more than usual, and it was starting to show. A group of local socialites, 8 or 10 of them, were engaged in a rather candid conversation as I approached. Sensing the direction, I decided to make myself scarce. But just as I was about to leave the room, I heard Sherry's voice, louder than usual. Hell, if it wasn't for Bill Jackson, I'd never have any real fun in my life. The group fell into sudden silence as some of the ladies noticed me nearby. Sherry, apparently sensing the change, turned and spotted me, her judgment clearly clouded by excess alcohol. "Travis, I had no idea you were there. You weren't supposed to hear that, darling." "My apologies, my bad," she said, punctuating her words with drunken giggles, sounding almost childlike. The women nearby didn't know how to react. Some quietly walked away, while the others sat in silence. Sherry looked at me with a silly smirk, as if she had just pulled off something mischievous. I set my glass down on a nearby table and made my way out of the room and the club. Instead of going home, I headed to the airport and 30 minutes later boarded a commuter flight to Reno. I always preferred Reno over Las Vegas. With each passing moment, my understanding of my relationship with Sherry became clearer. Things that had previously eluded me were now falling into place. A weekend in Reno seemed like it would provide further clarity. I switched off my cell phone. I easily secured a room at one of the casinos without any hassle. After opening an account with $20,000, I was swiftly granted a complimentary room. One interesting aspect of these casino accounts is that, unlike banks, they aren't subject to federal regulations, meaning no reports need to be made to the government. While any significant winnings must be reported, deposits into your account remain untraceable. Gambling wasn't really my thing, but I found their banking system intriguing. By the time I woke up, it was already noon on Saturday. Sitting down to a burger and fries, I pondered my situation. I found Reno appealing. Its comfortable climate owed to its high altitude and the abundance of services due to gaming made life convenient. Taking a stroll down by the Truckee River, I couldn't help but notice the symbolism of broken marriages. While I wasn't planning on a Reno divorce, the idea of symbolically adding my ring to the river intrigued me. On my way back to the hotel/casino, I passed a realtor's office with enticing pictures in the front window. Suddenly, the idea of owning a condo in Reno made perfect sense. After an hour in the office and a couple of hours driving around, I discovered a small furnished unit that I really liked. The only hitch was I couldn't buy it while still married. Fortunately, I managed to negotiate a discreet lease-to-buy agreement with a substantial deposit. The idea of the big deposit was mine, and the seller loved it. Early in my marriage, one of the best decisions I made was to take charge of our family finances. Sherry wasn't particularly keen on handling figures or banking, so she happily let me handle the bills as long as she could enjoy spending the money. That evening, I treated myself to a lovely sushi dinner. Before turning in for the night, I deposited an additional $10,000 from my Visa card into our casino fund. Despite my dislike for the cash advance fee, I deemed it worthwhile in this instance. The next morning, I was up early and decided to have breakfast at the casino restaurant. A plate of eggs, bacon, hash browns, and toast was just what I needed. As I sipped my second cup of coffee, I couldn't help but notice that my waitress had a noticeable black eye. She tried to hide it by brushing her hair forward, but it was still quite visible. She was a pleasant-looking woman in her mid-40s, diligently serving customers from table to table. It seemed like she was new to the job, as she was trying a bit too hard. A seasoned waitress would have been more composed and confident, but I admired her determination to do well. "Your name tag says Joyce. Is that your real name?" I inquired. "No, my name is Joan, but Joyce was the closest name tag they had," she replied. "Well, Joan, I'll have one more cup of coffee, and I promise to leave a generous tip if you tell me about the black eye." "Why don't I pour you a refill and you can leave a smaller tip, and I'll ignore your question," she retorted. "Fair enough. It was rude of me to pry," I conceded. I already had access to the condo, so I decided to gather a few essentials to make it feel like home. My first stop was the Silver Spur used car lot down the street. There, I picked up a Focus sedan with more mileage than I'd like to admit. It wouldn't be ideal for long trips, but it would do for running around town. Renting was an option, but I planned to be back regularly for a while. With a couple $100s, I managed to acquire everything I needed for comfortable living, including a few changes of clothes. The rest of the day was spent opening accounts at several casinos. I wrote checks to each establishment, and the money disappeared into my account without leaving a trace. By day's end, I had deposited $60,000 across 4 different casinos. I kept a small spiral notebook in my pocket to track the amounts, dates, and casino names, a chronological record of the money I supposedly lost gambling over the weekend. Of course, I hadn't actually bet a dime, but who would question it? Everyone knew I was a terrible poker player, so any losses at roulette, craps, or blackjack would be believable. I had 6 months to come up with the down payment for the condo. That should be no problem. I completely forgot about lunch, so by the time dinner rolled around, I was famished. The easiest option was to return to where I had breakfast. As luck would have it, Joan was my waitress again. "Why are you still here? Looks like a long day," she remarked. "I have to work double shifts to get by. I didn't think rent would be so high here. What would you like to drink?" It was best not to pry too much. I placed my order and aimed to be well behaved for the rest of my time there. When I finished eating, the waitress brought my bill and paused for a moment. "I'm sorry for being a bit short with you this morning," she said. "I'm still adjusting to being here, and I'm a little self-conscious about my eye. It was a parting gift from my husband when I told him I was getting a divorce. It's not the first time, but I hope it's the last. By the way, thanks for the generous tip at breakfast. It really helps." She smiled as she walked away, but it seemed tinged with sadness. I couldn't shake thoughts of her for the rest of the night. I realized there wasn't much I could do right away. I needed to get home to take care of a few things before I could plan anything else here. Booking a return flight wasn't difficult, but I was unsure about my plans upon arrival. The next morning, Joan was working again, and I managed to get one of her tables. When she dropped off the check after the meal, I stopped her. "I have a small problem, and I was wondering if you could help me out," I began. "I have to leave today and won't be back for a week or so. I need someone to house sit for me. It's a 2-bedroom condo, so you wouldn't have to worry about any living conflicts. Could you possibly help me out? It would be for at least a couple of months." Seriously, no catch. I don't like leaving the place empty. Most of the time, it'll just be you. And when I'm around, I'll keep to myself. I promise. I didn't really care if someone broke in and took everything. There wasn't much worth losing, but I couldn't let Joan know that. All right, is it close enough to walk to the diner? It's pretty close, but I'm leaving you my car too. Just make sure it always has gas for when I come back. I'll give you a heads up. There's a machine on the phone. Joan just stood there looking at me. I think she was worried it might be some sort of setup. I didn't have time to convince her otherwise. Here's the condo key and the car key. The car's parked at the condo. It's a dark blue Ford Focus. Here's the address for the condo. If you're not comfortable with it, don't go. I'll pick up the keys when I come back next Friday. I scribbled the address on a napkin and handed it to her. She took the napkin and keys, still looking uncertain. Joan, don't stress over it. If you're in, great. If not, that's okay too. An hour later, I was on my flight home. I'd have preferred to stay in Reno. After picking up my car from the long-term lot, I swung by the house. Sherry's car was gone, so I grabbed a few things for the week ahead. I packed underwear, clothes, shoes, and my laptop in less than 10 minutes. I also grabbed my passport and birth certificate. The company had some kitchenette units on consignment, and I could use one as I pleased. I booked one for the next 2 weeks. After putting my laptop battery on charge, I called my eldest son, Jason. I explained that his mother and I were having some issues and I'd be busy for a while. I asked him to let his sisters know not to worry. All 3 were at Auburn. I got a discount, but out-of-state tuition was still a pain. At least I could afford it. After hanging up, I plugged in my cell phone and jumped in the shower. All I'd had on the plane was a bag of peanuts. I was eager for a proper meal. Monday was a whirlwind. First thing in the morning, I headed to the bank and secured a hefty second mortgage on the house, leaving me in a situation where I owed more than the house was worth. But that was just a temporary setback. By the end of the month, things would be different. I hammered out a deal with Auburn, straight from the bank, to prepay tuition for the kids. The bank wired $240,000 directly to the school, leaving me with a cashier's check for just over $200,000 to take to Reno. I cashed in a couple of CDs despite the penalties and closed out my money market account. I decided to hold off on touching the credit cards until later in the month. By then, I was already late for work. My trusty secretary greeted me with black coffee and a knowing grin. "Good morning, Mr. Bell. Are you going to fill me in on what went down at the county club on Friday, or should I just rely on the gossip mill?" "Melissa, believe every word of it. Anything else you need to know?" I asked. Without skipping a beat, she replied, "What do you need me to do to help?" "Get me all the info you can on Bill Jackson. I think he used to work here, but I'm not certain. Have the staff take care of all my scheduled work without giving them a reason. Also, reschedule any appointments or meetings I've set up," I instructed her. Melissa flashed me a big smile and a thumbs up as she left the office. I had originally thought it would take weeks to sort everything out, but now it seemed like I could wrap it all up in a week. I called my lawyer and set up an immediate appointment. On my way out, I informed Melissa that I wouldn't be taking or returning any calls from my wife, and security was to keep her out of the building. Lenny Proctor, a college friend, and I got along well, but he never cared for Sherry. Given that, I thought he'd be the ideal person to handle my divorce. "I was at the country club on Friday, Travis, so I think I know why you're here," Lenny said when I arrived. "You're right," I replied. "I'm not trying to be a smart ass, Marty, but it's about time," Lenny said. "Again, you're right. I figured as long as I wasn't being publicly humiliated, I could handle it. That changed on Friday," I admitted. "I need access to all your accounts and a couple of powers of attorney. I'll have my assistant prepare everything and then give you a call. Anything else I should know?" Lenny asked. "Well, Lenny, I'm afraid the trauma of what happened on Friday triggered something in me. I've become addicted to gambling. I spent the weekend in Reno and lost thousands of dollars. I'm going back next weekend, and I'm afraid it'll be worse," I confessed. "Key, that's terrible, buddy. I assume you're keeping some kind of record or documentation of all these losses," Lenny replied with a big smile. "I have, and I will. I guess it would be a good idea if I send you copies of everything," I agreed. "Most definitely. You know, Marty, I don't think we should talk about this anymore, do you?" Lenny suggested. You're right. Do you need anything else? I asked. I'm good, Marty. Get the hell out of here and take care of business. Take this financial worksheet with you. Fill it out and bring it back when you come in to sign those forms tomorrow. I got your back, buddy, Lenny reassured me. It was around that time I realized I'd missed lunch. Melissa had a nice little sheet waiting for me with information about Bill Jackson. She recommended I speak to Rose Parker in the personnel department before doing anything else. Rose, a stalwart of the company for what seemed like eternity, ran a tight ship and excelled in her role. Her business suit and tight bun were as much a trademark as her unwavering confidence, which could be a tad intimidating to anyone encountering her. So when Melissa insisted I meet with her, it was clear this was serious business. Good afternoon, Mr. Bell. Please take a seat, she greeted me, attempting to ease the tension, but it was like sitting in front of a stern nun. Despite being a grown man in a significant position, I couldn't help but feel somewhat awestruck by her presence. She closed the door behind me. Melissa briefed me on the situation. I don't indulge in office gossip, but I deal in facts, she began, her tone serious. 3 years ago, Bill Jackson confided in me. I made a promise of confidentiality at the time, but it seems that promise can no longer hold. If anything I say offends you, feel free to leave and our conversation will end. Do you understand, Mr. Bell? Yes, I do. I believe I can handle whatever you tell me without resorting to a temper tantrum, I replied, trying to lighten the mood. She gave a slight frown, unamused by my attempt at humor. About 3.5 years ago, your wife, Sherry, approached Bill Jackson at a company function. There was a fair amount of alcohol involved, and by the end of the night, Bill and Sherry had engaged in a hookup in one of the private offices. Bill was about to get married the following month. Sherry threatened to expose him to his fiancée if he didn't continue to see her. He hoped she would relent after he got married, but she didn't. For months, she blackmailed him into dating her. In desperation, he turned to me for help and had to disclose the entire affair. Naturally, I couldn't betray his trust and disclose this to you or anyone else. The best solution I could offer was to transfer Bill to another office. Once he relocated to Dallas, Sherry left him alone. Bill never disclosed this to his wife. Any questions? It seems Mr. Jackson was just as much a victim in this mess as I was. I was considering some form of retaliation, but that seems rather foolish now. Any suggestions, Mrs. Parker? Now that you're aware, you have the control. I think you should just let it go. Bill Jackson is a valuable employee and asset to the company. Don't punish him for something your wife did. Thank you for your insight. I believe you're right. Being compelled to be intimate with my wife is punishment enough. As we rose from our seats, Rose smiled. By the way, it's not Miss. I've been married for 32 years. It was difficult to imagine Rose Parker in an intimate setting, but perhaps when she let her hair down, she transformed into a goddess. Suddenly, thoughts of dominatrixes crossed my mind, and I decided to change the subject mentally. I had more pressing matters to attend to than Rose's personal life. Melissa had rescheduled all of my appointments, leaving me with a clean slate. My wife called 3 times, refusing to believe I was in Baltimore, as Melissa had said. Melissa arranged an appointment for me with the company president the next day and one with the legal department for that afternoon. I asked Melissa to join me for supper. She laughed and said her husband wouldn't approve, then suggested I ask Rose and laughed again. The meeting in the legal department took longer than expected, and I ended up keeping a few people over time. I apologized, but they all seemed understanding. It turned out to be more complex than I had anticipated. Redeeming my retirement plan for a cash settlement was difficult. Closing out the 401k and shared savings account went smoothly but took time. Cashing in my sick time, vacation time, and company insurance was easier than most things. By then, it was clear that I was leaving the company. I hoped the news wouldn't reach my wife before I was ready. I found myself dining alone that evening. Oddly, my thoughts drifted to Joan during the meal. I wondered if she had settled into the condo or if she was still enduring double shifts at work. Though I barely knew her, the idea of returning to Reno and seeing her intrigued me. It felt somewhat juvenile, and I attempted to dismiss it from my mind. It was impractical to dwell on fantasies that would never materialize. The following morning, I cashed in 2 whole life insurance policies and terminated 2 term policies. I was astounded by the cash value the whole life policies had accumulated. I could collect the checks the following day. While my car was insured by the company, I canceled the insurance on Sherry's Lexus. The lease was in her name, but the insurance was under mine. Before heading to work, I stopped by Lenny's office, submitted the financial form, and signed a stack of papers his secretary had prepared. Melissa had coffee ready for me when I returned to the office. "Not to pour salt on your wounds, boss, but you should talk to Kurt Jenkins down in settlements before meeting with Matthew," Melissa said. Matthew Brooks was the company president, and I was fairly certain he already knew why I wanted to see him. The settlements division was located in the basement, of all places. I couldn't fathom why everyone else got windows and sunlight while they were stuck in the dungeon. "Kurt, Melissa mentioned you needed to talk to me," I said as Kurt led me to a secluded spot. Kurt Jenkins was the quiet type, always getting things done efficiently. He was the epitome of no nonsense, though not particularly exciting. He motioned me to a private corner. "I've heard things are getting intense in your office. I'm not one for gossip, but I felt you should know something. About 6 years ago, we had a guy here named Luis Torres. He was an all-right guy, married with 2 kids. He got involved with your wife after an office party. She kept contacting him, at home and here in the office. He regretted it and wanted to end it, but she wouldn't let him. She threatened to tell his wife if he tried to break it off. The fool called her bluff. 2 days later, Lewis's wife kicked him out. He spiraled into drinking and ended up losing his job. I don't know where he is now. Anyway, Lewis's wife threatened to tell you about your wife's affair. From what I understand, your wife paid her 10 grand to keep quiet. I have no proof of that last part. Thanks, Kurt. Wonder if anyone else has some uplifting news for me," I replied dryly. "I didn't mean to upset you, Mr. Bell, but Melissa thought you should know," Kurt said, somewhat sheepishly. "You did the right thing. I appreciate it." I headed straight to the 9th floor, a bit early for my appointment with Mr. Brooks, but he saw me right away. It was brief and to the point. The legal department, HR, and payroll would handle everything. When it was all sorted out, I was to call him directly, no matter where I was. He gave me a card with his private cell number. No promises, no regrets, no nonsense. Things were wrapped up neatly, yet remained open-ended. I nodded in acknowledgement and left without uttering a word. Melissa greeted me with a smile as I returned to the office, handing me my usual cup of coffee. I smiled back and said, "Book me a flight to Reno for Thursday morning, with a 2-hour layover in Dallas." She gestured with her head for me to glance out the window. Down in the parking lot, Sherry was in a heated discussion with the security guard. "She's been down there for over 20 minutes. They won't let her in, and she won't leave. What do you want to do, boss?" "Seems like the guards have it handled. The only issue I have is finding someone to have dinner with. I hate eating alone." I rang up Lenny to check on things. He insisted he couldn't proceed until I sorted out the financial mess. I needed to prove I had no money. Truth be told, I was flush with cash. Between the checks I already had, those on the way, and the balance in the bank, I was sitting pretty. I assured him I'd head to Reno early and wouldn't return until I was broke. Every so often, someone would pop in to tell me my wife was trying to reach me. She had all her friends calling their husbands at work to track me down. I lingered in the office a while longer, tidying things up for my replacement. Sherry was perched on the hood of my car, waiting for me. Melissa grinned and handed me the keys to her Honda Civic, saying it was a good excuse to get her husband to pick her up and take her out to dinner. "By the way, you're not going to do anything reckless in Dallas, are you?" "No, just wrapping up some loose ends. No vendettas, I promise." I drove to Allentown and had dinner at the Outback. I was back in my apartment before midnight. The next morning flew by. I signed more papers for Lenny, closed all the bank accounts, and canceled all the credit cards. I even arranged to have all the utilities shut off at the house the following week. I picked up checks from the bank, insurance company, and work. I had no clue I was worth so much money. I got a new cell phone and canceled the ones Sherry and I had. I sold my country club membership to an old friend for $23,000. When I made my final stop at work, my replacement was already there, a guy who seemed friendly enough. He'd arrived from Boston on just a day's notice, clearly seeing it as a good opportunity. Thankfully, Melissa knew the office operations better than I did, so there was no need for me to train him. There were a few items left at the house that I wished I had, but they weren't worth going back for. Melissa insisted I keep her car and said her husband would pick it up at the airport. For my own belongings, I grabbed a couple of cheap suitcases for my apartment. Anything I forgot, I could pick up in Reno. Suddenly, it dawned on me that I'd tied up all my loose ends. All my assets were now liquid. No stocks, no accounts, nothing of value, except for the house, which I was giving to my wife. Air Blue was quite accommodating. They had seats available and were happy to move my flight up. I called Lenny at home. "Hey Lenny, just wanted to let you know I'm heading out tonight. I assume you're all set." "I'm good, Marty. I could serve the papers tomorrow, but I still need that financial info ASAP." "You might as well give it to her now. I'll start sending you some evidence of financial irresponsibility as soon as I can." "Be careful, Marty. I don't want either of us getting into trouble. Sherry's probably going to get some high-powered attorney, most likely from Philly, and he might bail on her as soon as things turn sour. It's all on you, Lenny. Do your best for me. Just don't inflate the bill too much. I'll be a poor man soon, remember that. Oh, and see if you can find a guy named Luis Torres. He might need a hand. Depending on the situation, I might be the one to do that." "Got it, Marty. Safe travels, and let's keep in touch." I dialed the condo's number and left a message on the machine, informing her that I'd be arriving later that night. I wanted to ensure she wouldn't be alarmed if she heard someone at the door. At this point, I wasn't sure if she would be there or not, but I hoped she would be. It was strange. I barely knew this woman, yet I found myself hoping for some sort of relationship with her. For now, being friends would suffice. Her vulnerable situation made me cautious. I didn't want to appear to be taking advantage of it. Arriving early in Dallas, I had a leisurely breakfast. I was waiting in Bill Jackson's office when he arrived, clearly not thrilled to see me. "Mr. Bell, I'd like to say it's nice to see you, but that wouldn't be true. I think we both know that," he greeted me. "Relax, Bill. Hope you don't mind me being a little informal. I'm not here to give you a hard time. I just wanted to let you know I understand the situation you were in a while back, and there are no hard feelings." "You could have done that over the phone," Bill replied. "I know, but I was passing through and felt it was worth my time to clear the air." "I don't understand. Why would you want to do this? I'm the one who messed up. I should be apologizing to you for what happened. You didn't do anything wrong. I was young and foolish and made a terrible mistake. To this day, I'm too ashamed to even tell my wife. You were partly to blame for what happened, Bill, but I believe most of the problem stemmed from my wife. What she did caused problems for you, and now for me. I'm not saying you were completely innocent, but it wasn't entirely your fault. I don't want you to carry any more guilt than necessary because of my ex-wife's actions." "That's very generous of you to say. I'm not sure what to say or how to repay you." I handed him one of Lenny's cards. "Later today, give my lawyer a call. There's a chance he might need your assistance. It will be kept discreet. He might say he doesn't need anything at the moment. At most, he might request a notarized statement confirming the affair. I assure you, it won't get back to your wife." We stood up and shook hands. It felt strange considering he was one of the men who cuckolded me, but I thought it was appropriate. Bill Jackson was a decent man who didn't deserve to have his life torn apart over one mistake, even if it had happened multiple times. An hour later, I was back on my flight to Reno, trying to figure out where I went wrong. I worked hard to provide for my wife and children, ensuring they had everything they needed. I thought I did a pretty good job. It seems that in my efforts to take care of everyone, I neglected my wife. When faced with problems like this, we often try to find the root cause. In my case, I usually end up blaming myself. I can accept that, but now I have to confront Sherry's attempts to make a cuckold out of me. That's something I cannot accept or condone. If she had been discreet, maybe I would have just blamed myself forever. But she wasn't discreet, so I won't blame myself. The evening ended on a positive note. When I landed at Reno/Tahoe International, I was pleasantly surprised to see Joan waiting at baggage claim. She was dressed in jeans and a light blue Oxford shirt, the first time I'd seen her in anything other than a uniform. I hadn't asked her to pick me up when I called. I just wanted her to know I was arriving. "Good evening, Joan. I wasn't expecting you," I greeted her. "I figured since I had your car, it was the least I could do," she replied. "You're not working." "No, I was able to cut back, thanks to your generous offer." "Oh, I wasn't being generous. I was just trying to figure out a way that I could be alone with you." "And what do you plan to do with me when you get me alone?" "I don't know yet. I haven't planned that far ahead. Any suggestions?" As I grabbed my bags off the carousel, I noticed Joan blushing slightly. I took it as a sign to dial back a bit before I scared her off. Her question seemed like a bit of a tease, which was a good sign. 30 minutes later, we arrived at her newly decorated apartment. It was adorned with small touches that didn't cost much but greatly improved the atmosphere. To thank her for sprucing up the place and picking me up at the airport, I treated us to 2 prime rib dinners. Joan seemed to enjoy the wine more than the beef. "How's the divorce going?" I asked. "Terrible. I still have 3 weeks before I can even apply. You need 6 weeks to establish residency. I thought this would be easy, but it's been a nightmare. I should have just done it back home. Why didn't you?" Joan pondered for a moment, toying with her food before responding. "Getting away from Marco was more important than the divorce. It's just a piece of paper. It won't protect me from more beatings. I think I used the idea of divorce to justify leaving. It didn't matter where I went. The important thing was that I left." What Joan said resonated with me. Initially, divorcing Sherry seemed crucial, but now I wasn't so sure. All I wanted was to prevent her from benefiting from the marriage, and unless I had plans to remarry, it didn't really matter. I had no desire to do so. The rest of the evening was spent discussing more mundane topics like hobbies, movies, and books. Joan didn't have any children, and I didn't pry into why. We slept in separate bedrooms that night. Joan had already left for work by the time I stirred awake. A fresh pot of coffee greeted me, and that was all I needed. I was still feeling stuffed from last night's feast. After a brisk shower, I got down to business. "Lenny, how's my favorite lawyer?" There was a heavy sigh from the other end of the line. "Not good, Travis. I've got some bad news for you. Can you promise not to shoot the messenger?" "Oh, come on. I've only been gone a day." "What's happened now?" "Sherry's caused a storm. She found out about the bank accounts and other things. After calling the police, she got a restraining order against everything under the sun. All your accounts are frozen, even though they're empty. You can't go near her or the house. You can't take anything from the house. You can't contact your kids, even though they're adults. Most of it's nonsense, but it'll take a lot of time and money to sort it out. She's even brought the SEC into it regarding your 401 and retirement accounts. Somehow she's got the IRS poking around. Travis, I don't know how to say this, but I want no part in any of it. I'm out. Do you understand?" I felt overwhelmed. "So, I guess you won't be handling the divorce for me." "You got it, buddy. Just so you know, she's also hired a private investigator to find you." "I wonder how she's paying for all this." "Don't know, and I don't care. Just remember, if the cops or feds come asking about your whereabouts, I'll have to tell them. I'm not risking my career for you, even if we're friends." "I get it, Lenny. Protect yourself. I'll sort things out my end. I won't be calling you for a while." "Thanks for understanding, buddy. I hoped you would. Take care." With that, I hung up, feeling the weight of the situation settle heavily on my shoulders. Well, that threw a wrench into my plans. Sometimes, even the most carefully laid plans can fall apart in an instant. I had to resort to plan B, but the problem was I didn't have one. My ingenious scheme to pretend I'd lost all my money at the casinos was a bust. I decided against calling anyone else. Joan left me the car, which I appreciated, though I had no idea how she got to work. I found myself with a small duffel bag full of money and checks. I had to visit 6 different casinos to cash all my checks, exchanging them for chips or credit. I hesitated to go to the banks, fearing holds or traces. The casinos were more than willing to assist. By the end of the morning, I had deposited everything at several places and had a bag full of cash and chips. After a quick lunch, I began withdrawing. In 2 hours, all the chips had turned into cash, and all the cash was out of the casino accounts. Now I had a substantial amount of money, and everything seemed fine, no red flags or suspicions. It took me less than an hour to drive to Carson City. I rented a large safety deposit box at a small, obscure bank and stashed everything there, except for $5,000, which I kept for pocket money. I felt a sense of relief knowing everything was secure. I looked forward to another leisurely dinner with Joan to celebrate. I sensed something was off as soon as I walked into the condo. Joan was attempting to fix things that shouldn't have been messed up in the first place. She looked up at me and immediately covered part of her face, and that's when I knew trouble was brewing. "I'm sorry, Travis. It's my fault. I don't know how he found me, and I didn't realize he was following me until I got into the apartment. I should have been more careful. I am really sorry," Joan murmured, her hand slowly lowering away from her face. She had a new shiner and a fat lip to accompany it, a large bluish bruise covering the right side of her face. "Was it Marco?" Travis asked. Joan nodded. "He had his 2 brothers with him. They're out looking for you now. Marco told me not to leave the condo." "Where are they looking?" "I gave them the names of 3 casinos. The idiots don't even know what you look like. I don't think they're thinking straight." It was a no-brainer. They couldn't stay, and they couldn't call the cops. They left everything behind, heading west, and spent the night in a small off-road motel in Grass Valley. Despite having only 1 bed, Travis was a gentleman. He brought some takeout back to the room and got some makeup for Joan. She tried her best to cover up the bruises, but it still looked awful. She kept apologizing to him all night. He was relieved when she finally fell asleep. The next day, they drove into Sacramento to get some clothing and personal items. Travis had no idea when they would be able to return to the condo. They had the Grass Valley Motel for 2 more nights. Over the next few days, Travis and Joan got to know each other. Travis felt more comfortable with her after 3 days than he did with his wife after 24 years. When he wasn't talking with Joan, he was worrying about all the other things happening. He was afraid to take Joan back to the condo in case Marco would find her. He was afraid to go back himself in case somebody was looking for him. But he carelessly left his laptop, passport, and other personal papers there. He had a stupid idea that they were important to him, and he had to get them. Real stupid. I had only known Joan for a few days, but I felt I had to trust her. We were both in similar situations when it came to our spouses. "Have you ever been to Mexico?" I asked her. "No. Are we planning to go there, Travis?" Joan responded. "I don't know. Look, in case things go south, I need you to do something for me. I don't want you to get caught up, and I want to keep you away from Marco," I explained. "Travis, you don't owe me anything. You've already done more than enough. I'll be fine," Joan reassured me. "Well, I'm not sure how things will turn out for me. I have a stash of money. It's clean money, but I'm hiding it from my wife. If something happens to me, I need you to retrieve the cash for me," I disclosed. "Who's after you?" "You haven't told me anything about that. Did you do something illegal?" Joan asked, concerned. "Look, there are several federal agencies looking for me and a private detective. I'm sure the local police will be involved if necessary. All I'm trying to do is hide some money from my wife. She's trying to make it seem like I'm involved in something illegal," I explained. "What should I do with this money?" Joan inquired. "I've been thinking about that. Go to Guadalajara and wait for me. Use whatever money you need to get by until I arrive," I instructed. "How will you find me?" Joan asked. "Go to the Libertad market for coffee every morning. I'll find you. It's huge, but I'll find you," I assured her. "When should I do this?" Joan asked. "When you realize I'm in trouble," I replied. "Why don't I do it now?" Joan questioned. "Be patient. I'll take you with me. I'd rather go together than separately, I insisted. I'd feel better if we went together. Why can't we both go now? Joan pressed. The conversation had become repetitive, so I chose to ignore her. It wasn't meant to be rude. I was just eager to move forward. 2 hours later, we crossed the pass and arrived in Carson City. Joan's name was added to the access for the safety deposit box, and she received her own key. Upon returning to the condo, I parked half a block away. The complex had a lower-level parking area beneath the units, open to the outside but covered. I instructed Joan to wait in the car until I confirmed there wouldn't be any issues. What kind of issues? I had no clue. Given recent events, anything seemed possible, and unfortunately, it happened. As I walked through the parking area, scanning for anything suspicious, it occurred. Travis Bell. Turn around. He was a slight man, somewhat wiry. The long leather coat he wore made him look odd rather than intimidating. He lacked the presence to pull it off, but the large, black automatic in his hand compensated for it. Do I know you? His face lit up with a broad smile, proud to announce himself. My name is Costa. Your wife sent me. Okay, what do you need? I need your wedding ring and your wallet. I understand the wedding ring, but why the wallet? I have to make it look like a robbery. Make what look like a robbery? Your wife hired me to kill you, Mr. Bell. I hope she paid you up front because she doesn't have any money. What do you mean? That was the end of the conversation. Across the parking area, 3 burly Italians approached, looking quite menacing in their long leather coats. Marty Bell, we need to talk to you, Marco shouted. Costa was taken aback by the sudden intrusion. He pivoted to confront the trio, just as one of them spotted the gun in his hand. All 3 reached into their coats, prompting me to dive across the concrete barrier leading out of the parking area. In that moment, Costa's attention shifted away from me. As I hurried along the side of the building toward the car, gunshots reverberated off the garage walls. Glancing up, I saw Joan speeding down the street, while 2 men in suits exited a black SUV across from us. It was clear they were feds, likely waiting for me. The firefight provided a distraction long enough for me to slip away. Joan was gone. The car was gone. There was no way I was returning to that condo. I didn't care who shot whom in the parking garage. I just wanted out. 3 different groups were after me for various reasons, all at the same time. The message was loud and clear. I had a few options. One was to catch a bus to Carson City and collect my money, but I dismissed the idea. I was too hot for that, dealing with the fallout of a cheating wife. How did things escalate to this? Since I decided to let the heat die down on the money, I needed a place to lay low. I still had over $4 grand in my pocket, enough to hold me for a while. Why was my wife trying to have me killed? I thought she was smarter than that, realizing there was no more insurance money. I made a major mistake. I hopped on a bus to San Francisco. $4,000 doesn't stretch far in the city by the bay. The first grand got me a social security number and an ID, so at least I could find work. I snagged a room with a shared bathroom down the hall and landed a job waiting tables at a low-key restaurant. After about a month, I was earning enough to get by and had become a pretty decent waiter. Some customers even requested my tables. I hadn't been keeping up with my cell phone payments, so the service got cut off. I hadn't used it since leaving Reno. It only cost me a few bucks to get a new prepaid service and about 50 minutes of airtime. I wanted to call Joan, but I had no clue where she was or how to reach her. So I decided to call Lenny. Hey Lenny, it's Travis. Just checking in, I said. Marty, good to hear from you. Things are still a mess, but not as bad as you might think. Where the hell are you? Lenny replied. None of your business where I am. Last time we spoke, I was dealing with a lot of trouble, all sorts of people wanting something. Am I still on the run? I asked. Well, most of that drama's died down, especially after Sherry got arrested. IRS is still poking around about some 401k assets, though. Apart from that, it's all good, Lenny explained. What do you mean Sherry got arrested? I asked, surprised. I figured you'd know about that. Ever hear of a guy named Enzo Costa? Lenny replied. Yeah, met him briefly about 3 months back. He tried to take me out, but we got interrupted by some other guys who had their own score to settle with me. While they were arguing over who got a piece of me, I slipped out the back door. How's he involved? Sherry hired Costa to bump you off, but Costa ended up getting shot pretty bad out in Reno, and he spilled everything to the cops. He said Sherry was planning to stiff him on a 10 grand contract, so he turned on her. Surprisingly, the cops bought it and slapped her with charges. She's stuck in jail waiting for her trial because she can't make bail. Lenny, I'd love to lend a hand, but considering she tried to have me killed, I'm not exactly feeling charitable. Her folks should be able to cover her bail, but I'm not chipping in. I'll see what I can do, Marty. No one seems too interested in you right now. Want me to kickstart the divorce proceedings again? We've got solid grounds this time. Sure, why not? A divorce would tidy things up, though I couldn't care less anymore. Might make life simpler. I've got all the paperwork from before. I think I can still use most of it. Oh, and I forgot to mention, your kids all came home when they heard about Sherry's trouble. They were worried at first, but lost interest once they heard the facts. They want you to give them a call and let them know you're all right. I'll reach out to them as soon as I can. How's the money laundering scheme going? Terribly. I lost control and lost contact. I'll try to check on it next week. Sometimes, no matter how solid the plan seems, it just falls apart. All right, keep me posted, buddy. One more thing, Lenny. Did Sherry ever say why she wanted me dead? Not that I know of. I figured it was for the insurance, not realizing you'd canceled it. I checked in with the kids and everything was fine. They felt relieved knowing the tuition had been prepaid. They were curious about what happened between Sanda and me, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them. Some things would have to wait. I borrowed a car and drove up to Carson City. The safety deposit box was empty. I wished she had at least left a note. It wasn't fair to complain, though, since I had given her the key and access to the box. Did she go to Guadalajara, or did she find a place where I couldn't find her? There was only one way to find out. There were several small travel agencies in my San Francisco neighborhood. Most of them catered to group tours for compatible people, which I didn't quite fit into. After searching, I finally found a tour to my favorite Mexican city with a last-minute cancellation that I could qualify for. It was the first time in my life that I had to scrape together enough money for something. The trip wasn't too expensive. I just didn't have much money. I felt comfortable because a few of the guys on the trip worked at the same restaurant as me. Most of them had signed up for side trips, but I had other plans. The first 2 days turned out to be a letdown. The Libertad market was larger than I had imagined. In hindsight, it was a poor choice on my part. I hated to think that maybe Joan had decided to take my money and go somewhere more exotic. Perhaps she was in Bangkok or Tahiti. There was certainly enough money in that safety deposit box to live just about anywhere she wanted. I didn't know whether I should sit and wait for her to walk by, or if I should wander around and look for her. In the end, I did both. By the third day, it was getting tedious. It's about time, Travis. Where the hell have you been? I turned and saw Joan standing with her hands on her hips. She wore a wide-brimmed straw hat with a red band around it. Say something, damn it. I've been going nuts here, not knowing if you were even alive or not. I didn't say anything. I walked over and kissed her for the first time. I don't know why I hadn't done it before, but I was glad I did it now. That's quite a weak explanation. Perhaps you should give it another shot. With the second kiss came a tight embrace as I lifted her off the ground. Joan, I missed you so much. You still owe me an explanation for where you've been the last month, but we can talk about that later. Let's head home and grab some lunch. Hand in hand, we strolled through the market. For the first time in a while, I felt genuinely happy and content. Travis, don't be mad at me, but I used some of your money. Most of it is in the bank, but I needed a place to live, so I bought us a house. I hope you don't mind. There was a lot of money in that bank account. It was a beautiful hacienda in a picturesque city, and I was with an incredible woman. I love it when a plan comes together. Sherry's parents managed to raise her bail money and cover her legal fees. Lenny had no trouble getting her to sign the divorce papers. She ended up with a 5 to 8 year sentence for attempting to have me killed. We never did find out why. Bill Jackson gave Lenny a deposition, but he never needed to use it. Lenny tracked down Louis Torres, who was sober but struggling. When Lenny asked how he could help, Louis said he wanted a hot dog pushcart. I felt a bit better for $2,400. I resolved my issues with the IRS for $4,000. Costa is in jail in Nevada with Joan's husband and brothers. We're not sure how long they'll be there. Now I was free to return home. My old job, now with a promotion, awaited me. The law was no longer after me. Once Joan's Mexican divorce is final, we plan to tie the knot. The kids will join us for the wedding during spring break. While our house in Guadalajara is beautiful, we're pretty sure we won't stay there full-time. Joan wants to keep it as a vacation home. Melissa is eager for me to return to work, especially with the new position, which is a promotion for both of us. Joan is open to going anywhere, as long as we're together. She's curious to meet Sherry, so that should be interesting. Things didn't go exactly as planned, but who am I to complain? Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.